The Chinese people once tolerated abuses for the promise of better living standards, but that trade-off has vanished. After a year marred by widespread virus outbreaks, massive layoffs, a dire housing crisis, and soaring debt, the Chinese Communist Party is now fighting for its survival. Dive into the unraveling situation in today's episode of China Truths. 3 years ago, Wang Zhongwei had never dreamed of defying the Chinese regime. At just shy of 30 years old, he had his hands full running an apparel export business in Wenzhou, China, with dozens of employees under him. Wang dismissed his brother's repeated warnings from California about a spreading virus in Wuhan, holding a strong belief in the integrity of the Chinese Communist Party and convinced that China's leaders would never conceal such a global threat. However, Mr. Wang's eyes opened soon enough. Lockdowns turned his city into a prison, and he began to understand what the party was willing to do for the sake of power. If the regime could lie about matters of life and death, he wondered, what would become of him if he died of COVID-19? You are so insignificant that even if you die, nobody would know. If COVID-19 marked an inflection point for people such as Mr. Wang, the past year has just added to the regime's disfavor. 3 years of unceasing lockdowns shuttered hundreds of thousands of private enterprises, including Mr. Wang's, and decimated a sector that employs about 80% of the Chinese workforce at a time when the young and educated have been struggling to find jobs. Any dreams of the pain easing in 2023 all but vaporized. Despite Chinese policymakers' repeated push to extend financing support to small businesses, revitalize tourism, and bolster domestic spending, a desperately hoped-for economic rebound is nowhere in sight. Cutting salaries and delaying bonus. Cash-strapped governments have cut workers' salaries and delayed their bonuses. A public hospital in Gansu province is 15 months behind on wages. Plummeting demand has forced a medical equipment supplier in Chinese industrial hub Shenzhen to put employees on as much as 10 months of unpaid leave. Several other manufacturers, in industries from glass to aluminum, have resorted to the same measures in nearby Guangdong province. Bestor, a popular Chinese snack brand, slashed prices on about 300 products by as much as 45% amid its first year of slumping sales in 17 years. Given how consumers have tightened their purse strings, any other option would be a dead end, company founder Yang Yinfen wrote in an internal memo. Hong Kong-based advocacy group China Labor Bulletin recorded more than 1,900 protests and strikes of Chinese workers over unpaid wages in 2023. More than the number of clashes over the previous 3 years combined. The pessimism seeping into all corners of Chinese society. The heavily indebted real estate market is filled with frustrated owners of unfinished properties that bankrupt developers have left behind. In some cities, housing prices have nosedived so steeply that property holders are offering their newly furnished houses for free just to get rid of the monthly mortgage payments. Debt has become a glaring issue. Missed loan or mortgage payments have put about 8.6 million Chinese on a court blacklist, a figure that has surged by 50% since the beginning of 2020. Further fueling global concerns about China's faltering economy, Moody's in December downgraded the country's government credit ratings to negative from stable, undercutting Beijing's insistence that its economy is resilient and doing well. Determined to eliminate discordant voices, at least in the domestic sphere, China's top intelligence unit in mid-December elevated narratives concerning the economy to a matter of national security. Leaders hinted that anyone who badmouths the economy, on social media and elsewhere, could be held criminally liable. Former Beijing lawyer Li Jianping told the Epoch Times, "It just shows you how bad the Chinese economy is. The authorities are so out of options about reviving the economy that they are using this most nonsensical tack." A nation on the edge. A senior Chinese media executive, whose name has been withheld for his safety, told the Epoch Times that he's spoken to many high-ranking officials who have serious misgivings about China's current state of affairs. Top officials use their status to move their children and assets abroad, while those in the lower ranks are passively muddling along. Even the more affluent people in China struggled for food or medical assistance during the past 3 years of virtual imprisonment. Many are so eager for a way out that some have reportedly entrusted their life savings to complete strangers to sneak cash out of the country. By the numbers, China ranks highest in the world for departures of millionaires. 13,500 ultra-rich individuals were estimated to have left in 2023. Tens of thousands of other Chinese people are also fleeing the country, with a tenfold rise in those turning up in the U.S. Mexico border. On a single day recently, Chinese social media users searched 510 million times for ways to migrate out of China, a record that apparently so irked authorities that the app WeChat swiftly erased the keyword from its ranking history altogether. According to John Lee, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute who formerly advised the Australian government on Indo-Pacific affairs, a turn of sentiment among China's top echelons will be particularly alarming for the regime, as the party's mantra has been to co-opt the elites and keep them on its side, even if the rest of the country has to suffer. He said, "That's a lesson learned from the Soviet Union, that if you lose the support of the elites, then that's the first step towards being overthrown." Chief in their dissatisfaction is the shrinking economic pie. Hinting at the country's financial strains, party boss Xi has instructed government organizations twice in the past 2 months to get used to practicing a strict economy. Even with the opacity of the party apparatus, it's plain that the regime is feeling insecure. In recent months, Xi has broken precedent by firing those he had handpicked to lead both the defense and foreign ministries. He has replaced the heads of the regime's nuclear arsenal with outsiders, and in a year-end shake-up, he expelled 9 military generals from parliament. According to Yuan Hongbing, a Chinese dissident and former jurist who has access to the party's inner circles, it's not about leaking secrets or corruption, it's about the people holding disapproval of Xi Jinping's policies deep down in their heart. But, he warned that endless political roundups will only make matters worse. The resulting climate of fear, even if ensuring total obedience for the moment, will ultimately serve to demoralize and create more enemies. Domestic and foreign. Beyond the economy, China has had its fill of troubles on other fronts over the past year. Flooding, drought, and hail ravaged crops and lands prided as China's grain basket, cutting into Beijing's ambition to make the country, currently the world's largest food importer, agriculturally self-sufficient, and the regime's continued cover-up of new viral outbreaks feed into public discontent. In a major year-end speech, China's communist leader boasted that he has charted a course for the world's future. Creating a common destiny for mankind, he said, is one of his historical accomplishments of the past decade and reflects the shared wish of people around the world. But his declaration rings hollow when, on the international stage, Beijing's military aggression, human rights abuses, and economic coercion have increasingly walled off the regime from the West. Italy, once the only major Western nation to sign up for Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, has formally pulled out of the infrastructure program, while Argentina's new populist president has balked at an invitation to join the China-led BRICS Club of Developing Economies. Reports of Chinese espionage in Belgium prompted its Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, to call China a sometimes very hostile country, and U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, in defending new sanctions on Beijing, told a California National Defense Forum in December 2023 that China is not our friend but the biggest threat we've ever had. As geopolitical tensions escalate and people both rich and poor pack up and flee, even some of the most ardent China bulls are changing their minds. Investment firm Vanguard aborted plans to expand its China presence and dismantled its last China-based operating team in November 2023. 6 months after committing his firm to conducting business in the communist country through good times and bad times, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon is signaling a willingness to exit the country if the U.S. government orders it necessary. In the 3 months through September 2023, foreign investors siphoned $12 billion out of China, the first time such a cash run has happened since 1998, when Beijing began publishing such data. From top to bottom, the murmurs of dissent seem to be growing louder all around China. China's youth, at least 1 in 5 of whom now are out of work and out of school, appear determined to buck the regime's dictates. As she encourages them to eat bitterness, to perform menial labor and suffer for a greater cause, young adults are talking about tankping, or lying flat and doing nothing. Miles Yu, a principal China policy strategist to the Trump administration, sees disillusionment in this passivity. He stated that China has had economic downturns before, but the real problem nowadays is that the overwhelming majority of people have lost confidence in the system. So even if the economy bounces back, people don't want to believe in it anymore, that's why they get out. So it's either tankping or running away. Once people lose confidence in that regime, that's the beginning of a collapse of the government. A protest that shocked. The fragility of the regime was exposed in late November 2022 when anger over deaths in a lockdown Xinjiang building boiled over and students and residents nationwide took to the streets. Holding up white sheets of paper, they demanded that the Communist Party step down. It was the first time that the Chinese people had made such bold demands on a large scale since the 1989 Tiananmen protests. The revolt so stunned the regime that it dropped its harsh COVID-19 policies within weeks. Imprisoning protesters hasn't deterred others from commemorating the act of defiance. At Halloween, young people thronged Shanghai, dressing up as the COVID-19 rule enforcers. Zhang Junjie, who took part in the protests as a freshman at the Central University of Finance and Economics in Beijing, said seeing so many fellow students stand up gave him fresh hope for China. He said, "The CCP has been instrumental in molding everyone into followers of the party and the government ever since they were children. It has no idea that the Chinese people still have the courage to express their free will after so many years of brainwashing." A prolonged neighborhood shutdown caused Mr. Zhang's grandmother to go for a month without heart medicine. Her chronic heart condition deteriorated, leading to surgery. For his activism, Mr. Zhang said he was expelled from school, shut into a mental ward, and fed psychological drugs. He doesn't regret it. To Zhang, it's an honor for him after fleeing to New Zealand, where he's seeking asylum. When Xi Jinping traveled to San Francisco in November 2023 for the APEC summit, Mr. Wang, who lost his apparel business during the pandemic, protested near Xi's hotel, wearing imperial Chinese garb as a mockery of the communist ruler's unchecked power. Soon after the protest, Chinese police tracked down and threatened Mr. Wang's relatives in China. His Chinese social media accounts were suspended. He shrugged it off. What else can they do? The stronger you are, the weaker the evil is. As invincible as the CCP looks, it will crumble with a push. Don't forget to leave a comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from China Truths.